So as Carolyn said, this paper is called Context-Based Micro-Training, a framework for information security training. And it's actually designed as the sort of a summary paper reporting on the last step of a research effort that's been going on for quite some time. It would have been so nice to have this presentation at Lesbos, because the very first paper concerning this area was actually my first research paper, and it was, I guess I'll have to continue and have something else written for next year. So the agenda is just a little bit about the problem area and the background. Then I will describe the context-based micro-training and what we've previously done, and I will try to sum up with the latest steps in the development of this framework, and of course present the framework. And I can tell you already that this is going to be an overview presentation, and all the details should be present in the paper or even in the reference papers. But I will of course answer any questions you might have. So the idea or the need for this research or the problem area is that, as we all know, users tend to exhibit an insecure behavior in many ways, such as poor password habits. They respond in unwanted ways to spam phishing. There is any sort of social manipulation is very effective in terms of use as an attack vector, and so on and so forth. And this is despite recurring reports of an attacks and training efforts used by companies and organizations worldwide. Looking to the research, training is still often suggested as the way to counteract poor user behavior, even if there is some suggestions of think before you act mechanisms like security nudges. But we still we still have the struggle that users tend to be more interested in, well, doing whatever they want to do than in security. So the purpose of our research in this paper and previous as well as future projects is to develop guidelines for in-the-moment security training to try to facilitate all the different ideas of how to empower users to behave better. And the objectives that we've been working with has essentially been those three, where what we want to do first and foremost is to develop a framework of guidelines for user training that supports user awareness and security related decision making. So we want to have quite a practical effort looking at what we want to achieve, which is achieving that users simply act better or are more aware of their actions. During this research, we evaluated how the framework we developed in Objective 1 can assist in making users act more securely, and also evaluate if it can be applied in higher education as a means to develop learning material. So the rest of this presentation will describe the context-based microtraining, or CBMT, development by presenting some previous research, and then discuss the latest step where we sort of set the framework to a more useful framework that we call CBMT version 1.0. So an overview look at the research process. I will go through this in extreme overview. We did a literature overview and a feasibility study a couple of years or quite a few years ago, and that resulted in a suggested framework that we then wanted to test in higher education to see if we could actually achieve learning outcomes with it. And then we also tested it in a security context to see if we could get an increased security behavior. We saw positive results from both of those, as I will go through a little bit more in a short while. And we also gathered some quantitative or qualitative data from those tests that we used to refine the framework to what I will present in the last 3 slides, I think. So I'm gonna skip a little bit, but what we did in the first step was essentially that we established 4 requirements on what we needed information security training to do, or what we needed it to fulfill. And we called this, at that point, a situated learning-based defense mechanism. So I come from a technical background, and there we're all about defense mechanisms. I'm not really sure if that's what it is anymore, but and that was the name then. And we gave it 4 requirements and said that it should provide training that users want to make use of instead of forcing users to participate in the training. And this comes from the notion that we can't really force users to do anything, because if the users don't want to do it, they will simply not care or find another way to circumvent what we're trying to present to them. We also wanted the framework to include an awareness increasing mechanism. And the idea here is that it should be built into the training that even if users simply disregard or click away whatever we present to them, it should still have raised security awareness to top of mind, and thus give some sort of effect, even if they don't really read what we tell them to read. We also found that it should provide training to users when the user is in a situation where the training is relevant. And this comes from realizing that when we send emails to users, or when we give lectures to users as part of employee days or similar, they don't really listen, because they may not see the use, or they may not really be interested at the time, or as any one of us surely can attest to, whatever the manager says during a morning meeting is not the most pressing matter for us at the moment, because we have to go do a research project, or we have to go do an application, or we have to go do something else. So instead we thought that if we have some sort of technical system that can see when a user is in a risky situation and present the training, then the user may be more anxious to make use of the training. And also finally, that the training shouldn't require any prior knowledge from the user. And this may go without saying, but it's harder to, it's actually harder than it seems to achieve. We developed a framework which was evaluated and presented at HAISA in 2015. And insights during the evaluation since then led to the updated framework that I will present today. So what happened since then is that we did continue the development, and we realized that the 4 requirements that we had was good as goals, but to really make this framework something that could be implemented, we needed to have some guidelines that was meant to speak more to the practical implementation. So we have the goals that are good for sort of describing what we want to achieve, but we were sort of missing the how. So we also developed some guidelines that I will briefly present, and to achieve those goals that I just spoke about, we realized that we needed to find a way to have training delivered to users when it's relevant to their current situation. We also realized that it's important to deliver it in short sequences, and this is to minimize the disruption for the users, because what we really want to achieve is to have the training in line with the user's actions, or what the user intend to perform, and not seen as something that's an obstacle for the user in the task that the user actually wants to do. So as one example, a user may want to create an account, and then the user is actually in a situation where the user wants to create an account. And if we comes along and present password security guidelines to the user, then we have to do that in a very short. We also see that it should be or should include a practical element. So they are actually to realize that it must be possible for users to opt out in some way, because if we force training on the users, then oh, great. Did I lose connection, or am I still here?
You're still there.
Oh, wonderful.
Even out a little bit on my system, but you're still here at the moment.
Yeah, my computer said that I lost connection, but I'll continue. And at this point, then we named the framework context-based micro-training, and it was basically the version 0.05 or something like that. So we took it out to some evaluation and refinement, and we created 2 implementations of it, one for use in higher education, and there we basically had students take a course that was based on context-based microtraining learning material and studied if we could achieve learning outcomes. Essentially, do people learn from using this material? And then we had one module for password guideline training. And what we did in that evaluation was that we implemented it on a website and measured if passwords got better. So the learning material was created for those evaluations, of course. They're available for anyone. One is open source and available at GitHub, and the other one, and the ones for higher education, are available at YouTube. There are links in the paper if you want to check them out. And we collected a lot of quantitative data that we used for the actual evaluation, and then qualitative data, free text answers and interviews and such that we used for guideline refinements. So I wouldn't really be here if our evaluations didn't show proper results. Then I would have been forced to go back and think some more. So the higher education evaluation was presented last year at a conference called the Open Symposium. And in this evaluation, we created learning material for a Cisco Network Academy course. And the reason why we picked this course is because it teaches a standardized curriculum and uses standardized testing. So even if I'm still the teacher and introduce an obvious risk for bias, I still use standardized material and standardized quizzes. So I can't really affect how the students are tested, at least. So students taking the course was given the material based on CBMT as the primary learning material. They did, of course, have the written textbook available and a teacher available for discussions. And then we simply measured the results from the evaluation year to the results of previous course years. And they revealed similar results in terms of student outcomes, which was actually rather good, because we know that the students were actually taking a course before, and we didn't really want to see that we did something better for higher education, or not necessarily better, but we needed to be at least as good. We didn't was really bad from a pedagogical standpoint. We also did a survey on student perception and could see that 26 out of the 28 students preferred using CBMT over traditional lectures, and 75% of the students used 9 or 10 of the 10 recorded lecture, which is a higher participation than we're used to when we give physical lectures. So then we did a security evaluation as well, and for that we developed the CBMT module designed to teach password guidelines, and we implemented that on the registration page of a local internet service provider. From that point, 50% of the visitors that were supposed to register a new account were shown the CBMT implementation upon password creation, and the other 50% used the original page. And then we used a password strength scale that developed by Dropbox that assigns created passwords with a strength metric of between 0 and 4. And we basically just compared the median value of the passwords from the two groups, and could see that the CBMT module users had a median value of 3 for their password, while the other group had a median of 2, and those results were statistically significant at the 99% level. So that's a very good result, where we could see that we actually managed to increase security behavior by using CBMT training. We also did a quick test where we did a survey, and we had participants actually register for the survey and said to them that they needed to register and create an account, because they were going to get personalized feedback on their survey results once they completed the survey. And in this case, we had the users presented to 3 different registration pages, one using the context-based microtraining, one presenting password tooltips in plain text, and one presenting password tooltips using a link to a plain text message. Then we asked them some questions about the guidelines we just presented to them, and this survey suggested that the participants that used the CBMT module were slightly more aware of the password guidelines than the ones that just got the same information in plain text, but significantly more aware of the guidelines than users presented with a link, which sort of emphasizes the notion that users are not going to take extra actions, in this case click a link, in order to get to get to where they want to be. So I think I have to speed up a little bit. Next thing we did was use the data we gathered in those steps, insights acquired during the evaluation, and a discussion at a seminar within the Swedish IT Security Network for PhD students to refine the framework even more. And what we basically looked for in this data was information that spoke of needs for additions or changes of the goals and guidelines in the CBMT framework. And moving quickly to the results of that, we did some updates that, and that's what's in italic here. So we added a new goal saying that it was necessary for the training implemented according to the framework to minimize annoyance for all users, especially for users already familiar with the subject, because we could see that users that already considered themselves good at what we had to say were just annoyed by the training that we sort of forced on them. We did some more modifications to the guidelines, especially in terms of that the training should be situation aware. We found that, or realized when doing the experiment in the higher education scenario, that the situation can be either constructed or natural, where a constructed situation is, well, a teaching setting where we actually have students or users do something that they wouldn't normally do as part of a training session, or natural, where a natural situation would be something that occurs naturally to the user, i.e. when they are going to create a password for one of their accounts. We also realized that to clarify, we could modify the fourth bullet to not be include a practical element, but rather include or directly relate to a practical element, because, well, when we present training, that's not really a practical element. A practical element is what the users do afterwards. We also emphasized that the information presented must in itself be easy to understand, and I think that this is something that that is actually quite important, because there are several examples of trainings or information efforts at various web pages around the world that do include very good information, but perhaps the user doesn't really understand it. So for instance, say a case where you're going to select on an encryption algorithm for your Bitcoin wallet or for your PGP mail encryption system, and the system asks you to select if you want to use triple DES or AES, and the user will be left without a clue because they don't really understand that. We also saw that it's favorable if we highlight the most important points of the information. So this comes down again to making life as easy as possible for the user. And one guideline became then that the most crucial points of the information should be highlighted. So if there is only one single thing that we need users to take with them, then information should be written in bold letters with a large font size. So in the password example, for instance, you may want to make sure that the only word that the user understands or knows from following your training is long, and then they will be quite a far bit along the way. And then we also added that it should be possible to skip the training altogether, and this is perhaps one of the things that you could question a little bit, but from what user perceives about what I think we find that user thinks about security training or security measures in general, they do want the ability to skip, and we decided to keep it in here, and I would say that that's a point that could be discussed and researched further. So to conclude, I hope I'm within my 20 minutes. This paper presents the latest steps of an ongoing research effort, and the presented framework is seen as ready to use, and the evaluation steps that we've taken provided promising results. Of course, there is always future work, and one thing that you could do is to review the framework from a pedagogical angle using pedagogical theories. Another thing you could do, or that we will do, is to implement the framework in more security-related context and evaluate the results to see that we can actually get security benefits in more contexts than password creation. So that was it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you.